Get that. Up to your bike. All right. Greets. Back at Colgate this time. And this week our lesson is about alcohol. Alcohol, the king of beverages, perhaps, at least historically speaking, one of the longest lasting drugs that humanity has developed. Did not invent the drug that is alcohol or ethanol. Exists in nature. It happens, it occurs, it is made, I guess you could say, nature makes it, when fruits or sugars ferment. They sit around and they get eaten by certain yeasts, and those yeasts essentially excrete ethanol. And ethanol is what is in alcohol that gets us feeling the way we do when we drink it. So let's get on the trail here and start our talk about alcohol. So, as I just discussed, alcohol is made from fermented sugars and fruits that can be made from starches that become sugars and that are eaten by yeasts, and the product is carbon dioxide and ethanol. So the carbon dioxide gives alcohol its fizz, if it has fizz, like a beer or a champagne. Wine has the fizz essentially taken out of it as a process, and other liquors and alcohols are essentially mere versions of wine and beer, frankly. We're covering alcohol this week as a depressant. It's in the category of depressants, the D in podcast, if you remember. And so, yeah, I know you'll never think of the word podcast again the same, will you? So, yes, it's CNS, or central nervous system depressant. It works on the GABA systems of the brain and inhibits neuronal activity, meaning that it's harder to think, harder to act, harder to move, and more likely to go to sleep than anything else. So it's been well known, its effects have been well known for, I believe, all of human history. The first recorded use of alcohol goes back to 6400 BC. That is nearly 9,000 years ago. So it's one of the first recorded documents how to make beer. That's not a coincidence, because it's also a very similar recipe to bread. Bread and beer go hand in hand, because it's essentially the use of yeast and flour or grain, a starch that will become broken down into sugar, which will then ferment. So check out the fermentation process. There's a video there on the notes, and you can see fermentation in action. Through fermentation, depending on what you're fermenting, you will create either beer or wine. Beer and wine are essentially the products that can be made without any other process other than fermentation. But there are many, many varieties of fruits, grains, other foods that you can ferment to create an alcoholic beverage. Honey, for instance. Sugar, and ferment, it becomes mead. One of the very first alcoholic beverages in history. So another way you can produce alcohol is through distillation. Distillation involves evaporating the alcohol and turning it essentially into a vapor, because alcohol boils at a temperature of 78.4 degrees Celsius, whereas water requires 100 degrees Celsius to boil. So the alcohol will boil off, and when it evaporates, if you capture and condense the evaporated liquid, you will have a much more pure form of alcohol. Pure ethanol, in fact. Near pure. This is how all liquors are made. This can be then added back into another product or flavored in particular ways to create the various liquors that exist, the vodkas and gins. Gin involves straining it through juniper berry, kind of tree, and vodka, of course, has a potato content to it, potato flavor, I guess. Whiskey is the product of distillation and the use of certain grains like barley, rye. So rye whiskey, barley whiskey. There's let's see. Oh, corn, of course, and we call corn whiskey a particular name because of where it was invented and popularized, and that was in a certain region in Kentucky, a county called Bourbon, getting its name from the French province, I believe. And so Bourbon, Kentucky became bourbon, the drink, and that is corn whiskey. So yeah, the different alcohols have different alcohol content, and you can tell the alcohol content by looking at the proof on a label of liquor. The proof is the amount of alcohol in it, the percentage alcohol it is, times 2. So if something is 160 proof, that means it's 80% alcohol. It's pretty steep. If something is 80 proof, it's only 40% alcohol, less than half. Half of it's something else. So that is how you tell how strong a drink liquor is. Beer, typically your average American beer has about 4 to 5% alcohol. Stronger ones like IPAs might have 8 or 9. Wines typically have anywhere between 12 and 14 to 15% alcohol. It's hard to get a higher alcohol content than 14 or 15%, because what happens is when the yeast ferment, eat up the sugars in the rotting fruit, they will eventually run out and start eating themselves up and then die. The colony will die. And the colonies typically can reach a concentration of about 15% ethanol before they succumb to the effects of the ethanol itself and die off. So that's the process, and a few different types of alcohol. I'm not going to get into the types of beer and types of wine in the video here. I'll leave that to you to look at in the textbook and the notes. What is the difference between an ale and a lager? What different varietals of grapes exist to produce the red and white wines of just about every region of the world these days. You can get some fantastic wines from Australia, from obviously Europe, from Argentina and Brazil, all over the world, South Africa. So wine is no longer exclusively a French thing. Certainly not. Let's look at alcohol historically in America. Looking at the periods before and after the American Revolution, for instance, we can see that there are remarkable norm differences in the perception of alcohol before the American Revolution, where it was perceived as a positive product of necessary in society. People drank more alcohol than water, partly because it was a anesthetic and was difficult to contaminate. So they saw drunkenness as a personal problem, not so much a moral problem as just somebody who's misusing a product in the same way that we might see other drugs today being misused. So, drugs, legal drugs, I mean, like OxyContin or something like that. After the American Revolution, the perception of alcohol was sort of a bit different. The medical model really emerges in the revolutionary period with a doctor named Benjamin Rush, a physician and one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And Rush believed that there was a medical aspect to alcohol dependence in the way that many people do today. He also thought that it damaged morality and advocated for temperance societies to rise up in the United States. Temperance societies are groups of people who are anti-alcohol, or maybe a lighter version of that, anti-liquor, where beer and wine would still be acceptable in some of these societies. So it became fashionable to take the pledge, be a temperate member, and avoid alcohol because there's a real stigma against it. As a result of that stigma, states started to ban alcohol. By 1917, 64% of Americans, that's 2 out of 3, were living in a dry state, county, village, district, or area. So they didn't have access, dry meaning they didn't have access to alcohol. It was illegal. And then, of course, the Great Experiment occurs in the end of World War I, 1919. The Great War is over. There's a return to kind of the wild side of life. The Roaring 20s are about to happen, and they're going to happen without alcohol, because in 1919, at the very end of the month of December, Congress passes a bill prohibiting alcohol throughout the United States. The classic era of prohibition begins. It really begins, I think, in January 1920, when that bill goes into action. But yeah, state prohibition leads to federal prohibition, and it took an amendment to the actual Constitution in order to prohibit that freedom enjoyed by people prior to the Prohibition era. So Prohibition is on the move in the 1920s, yet alcohol, believe it or not, is still around. Organized crime takes the opportunity to provide the people what they want. Speakeasies remain open, providing location for those thirsty individuals who desire their alcohol despite its illegality to get it. And this also creates a backlash of intense enforcement against alcohol, trying to enforce the 18th Amendment and prohibit alcohol truly. So some of the famous characters there are the Untouchables. They called them police force, including Elliot Ness, that's the most famous name, an organized crime busting cop. I think there's a movie about him, played by Kevin Costner. So yeah, alcohol remains forbidden for 13 long years, 1920s and early 30s. It was economic collapse that really broke the back of the 18th Amendment, and the government, after 1929, the great collapse of the stock market and the beginning of the Great Depression, an economic depression that lasted about 10 years, and the government's looking for money as much as anybody else is. They know that alcohol sales could bring in tax money, so that was one incentive for the government to end the Great Experiment of Prohibition. And By 1933, it was clear that the population was pretty much done with the law itself, although it did have a pretty remarkable effect in reducing the amount of alcohol that was consumed in America. Beginning of the 1900s, before Prohibition, people drank twice as much alcohol as compared to after, in the midst of the Great Depression. Now, part of that might have been the Depression, but that trend lasted. It lasted past the World War II, into the 40s and 50s, and really up till today. Yeah, okay, so it was 1981 that had the most recent year with the highest alcohol use. It's been going down since 1981. And so the trend continues. All right, hi, we're back. Really go anywhere, but we're back. Other facts about types of people or categories that are related to alcohol use include by age. Young people do tend to drink more, but college going young people actually drink more than their non-college going peers. That's a clear difference. Males tend to drink more than females. Clearly gender differences in the use of alcohol. In terms of the amount of alcohol consumed, you've got clear average of about 3 drinks per day drunk by people, but that accounts for all the people who don't drink anything and all the people who drink quite a bit more than that, probably unwisely. Averages, of course, can be deceiving. 50% of all the alcohol consumed in the U.S. is consumed by 10% of the people. So, yeah, the alcohol-dependent people, most likely. Okay, let's talk about the pharmacology of alcohol. In terms of bodily distribution, or how it gets moved through your body after you consume it, usually by drinking. The alcohol will, of course, go into the digestive tract, be absorbed through the small and large intestines, and it will start to enter your bloodstream, and the ethanol will be taken to your brain, which then affects the neurotransmission of the central nervous system, exhibiting all the symptoms of being drunk. The amount of alcohol that's in the blood is a measure of the blood alcohol content. The specifics of how that's measured are in the notes, but generally you're looking at being under the influence at about 0.8, I think, grams per 100 milliliters. Not certain about that measure, so again, look that up. But 0.8 is the classic number there. I'm sorry, it's 0.5 in New York State. I'm gonna have to look that law up. It's changing. But 0.8 is DUI, driving under the influence. Driving while impaired, I think, is 0.5. In any case, relatively low levels, which would entail having 1 or 2 drinks. Why 1 or 2? Why not just 1? Or is the answer just 2? It's 1 or 2 because people react differently to alcohol in their bodies. Body weight, of course, whatever's in your digestive tract will have an effect on what is going to be absorbed there. So if you just eat like a loaf of bread and then you go drink a beer, you're probably not going to feel much because it's all going to be soaked up by the bread and more distributed through the small and large intestine more evenly, perhaps. But yeah, what you eat, your social environment can be have an effect on the symptoms of blood alcohol content as well. When you're nervous and you're concerned about what's going on, you might feel the alcohol more intensively as a behavioral syndrome, the acute behavioral symptom of alcohol use is to disinhibit you slowly the alcohol will make you feel more comfortable and more social, perhaps, to a point. Sometimes too social. All right. So a drink or two will give you the DWI, I think, amount, roughly 0.5%. Standard drink has about 0.5 ounces of pure alcohol, half an ounce of pure alcohol. The standard drink might be a 12-ounce can of beer, a 5-ounce glass of wine, a 1-ounce 100-proof spirit, 100-proof, maybe a weak rum or whiskey. That's a shot. 1 ounce is a shot. So that's that's what's considered one drink, which each one of those would have about a half an ounce of pure alcohol in it. You metabolize alcohol in your liver, and that's what gets rid of it. And you metabolize a certain quantity per hour, and that quantity is 0.25 ounces of alcohol. So if you take in half an ounce of alcohol in one drink, and you get rid of a 1/4 ounce of alcohol in an hour, how many hours is it going to take you to get sober? This is what math is for, folks. 2 hours. 0.25 the first hour, 0.25 the second hour adds up to 0.5. Your alcohol's gone, your liver's metabolized it, no more drunk. If you start drinking more, you can gauge how much you've taken in by the number of drinks per hour, and then check yourself in a few hours and say, where am I? Am I going to be safely drinking this beverage? That's part of what it means to be a responsible drinker, right? All right, so other techniques of getting sober do not work. Exercise, caffeine, coffee, caffeinated beverages don't work. They just give you a wide awake drunk who's probably more destructive. So not a great plan. The liver responds to chronic intake of alcohol by increasing the enzyme, so it gets more efficient at breaking down ethanol, and that is what creates tolerance and increases the amounts of alcohol that people drink when they start to become dependent. Okay. Finally, the mechanism of action of alcohol is, again, the GABA receptors in neurotransmission and the nerve endings of connected nerve networks of the brain. You've got a number of neurotransmitters, if you recall. That's the SNAGD acronym, SNAGD, serotonin. I'm not going to say them all, but we're talking about here the GABA, one of the G's in SNAGD. And so GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, is a neurotransmitter that inhibits neurotransmission, which means it stops neurons from talking to one another. And that is a classic sign of a depressant. That's what makes alcohol a depressant in that category. May seem like you're more alert, wide awake, and social. That's a bit of an illusion, I think, at the beginning of drunkenness. And then later on, it's pretty clear when you fall asleep on the couch because you're just so exhausted. You don't know why. Of course you do. It's the alcohol. All right, so alcohol has those behavioral symptoms I just mentioned. That's a form of toxicity, if you recall, the acute behavioral toxicity. Acute physiological toxicity involves discoordination, ataxia, and eventually coma, which is just a fancy way of saying blacking out. And so those symptoms appear, and they can certainly create some pretty hazardous situations if you don't pay attention to them. One of the most hazardous things you can do is drive drunk. You don't want to do it. Avoid it at all costs. Whoa. Bike drunk either. I'm not. I'm waiting for that later for that. But let's see. 40% of all fatalities in car crashes are due to alcohol. It's almost half. So it's just not a good idea. Chronic physiological symptoms of alcohol use are such that the liver eventually gets worn out. It's a disease called cirrhosis, and there's some pictures of cirrhosis of the liver in the notes. It's not pretty. There are the common physiological symptoms of bloating of the face, hands, a slight tremor, a palpitation, behavioral symptoms of a craving, typical to smoking or any other dependency if the person is truly dependent. And so those are some of the telltale signs of an alcohol-dependent person. Dependency is a serious topic. It is a fact of life, I think, that affects many people's lives. If you don't know somebody close to you, you probably know of somebody dependent on alcohol. And so I urge you to take a close look at the table from the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual 5, which has some of the criteria of alcoholism if you are ever concerned about yourself or anybody else in your life. You may think back to this and recognize the signs before they become too problematic. All right, that's about it for the lecture on alcohol. We'll move on with High Price, chapters 10 and 11. We're reading 2 chapters a week now. We're really cranking through it at the end of the semester so we can read to the end. Okay, so thank you very much. See you next time. And here's what we do after biking. Cheers. Hi, here we are back again at the fire and after the ride. So I'm getting into High Price, chapter 10. It's titled The Maze, and there's kind of a double entendre there, 2 meanings of the maze. He's talking about the maze of the rat lab that he ends up working in at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And that rat maze taught him a lot about the psychology that he eventually gets into by the end of the chapter, where he is in fact dissecting rats' brains in order to understand the effects of cocaine and the dopamine systems that he's studying, or he's about to get into studying in graduate school shortly after graduating from UNC. So the second meaning of the maze is the maze of life, really the rat race that we all face ahead of us in the real world, when we have to find jobs, have an income, meet our goals for ourselves, such as education or other goals, and do that all in the context of the complex social rules and the frameworks that we have to constantly negotiate, and that maze that we have to run in order to reach those goals and achieve those ends. So Art discusses the maze that he runs, moving from the Air Force eventually to college to finish his college degree, and then to move on into graduate school. And so he has a series of relationships, and he discusses how the people he was with helped him to recognize his own potential. And by the end of those relationships, I won't get into the details, although he does discuss, interestingly, his first use of cocaine in this chapter. And he discusses how he was encouraged to go to college and perhaps even go on in college to get his PhD. Particularly helpful to him in his college experience is the psychology professor, Rob Haken, who allowed him to work in the rat lab and who really mentored him toward becoming a true researcher into the psychological phenomenon that Haken was studying. Particularly important in research is a real dedication to the laboratory. I've known some researchers myself in immunology and other sciences who
spend hours and hours in the lab, sometimes going in the middle of the night in order to take an experiment out of the fridge or to do something to it that was necessary in the course of the experiment. Just a real dedication to the laboratory experience is what science and science research is all about. So he learns all this in college as he works in the rat maze and with the rats, learns how to dissect their brains in order to understand the effects of different drugs on them. And that is all guided by his mentor, Rob Haken, who he gives a lot of credit to for pushing him hard, giving him the vocabulary that he needed to understand how to communicate these scientific ideas. And that is how he gets eventually into grad school as well. I like the statement that ends that chapter. He says, "I felt like I was really learning something. This knowledge was important and vital. The black kid who'd once been in the trailer for the learning disabled, whom his high school had relegated to business math and parking patrol class, was now on his way to a doctorate. I could now see a clear way out of the maze." Chapter 11, titled Wyoming, is about his move to University of Wyoming and his first years in graduate school. He describes Wyoming as a snowy place, something that you might also feel about northern New York and Morrisville here if you're from anywhere south of the central New York area. He talks about his move to Wyoming. He discusses somewhat the racial component. Blindingly white, I think, is how he describes Wyoming, and it's different than UNC. UNCW, Wilmington, which they call UNC White, because the school itself in North Carolina is so very different than the surrounding black community. The racial component is kind of right in your face, if you will. Whereas in Wyoming, he describes his persona as being more like a celebrity. He's so unique that he's more likely to be treated as an individual rather than as a stereotype. He finds that somewhat of a relief after the University of North Carolina. Talks a little bit about his language deficit again and the advice that his girlfriend's father gives him before going to graduate school, and that is to ask questions. If you don't know something, ask questions. Vitally important advice that helps him to get through graduate school, and that I would verify being a person who went to graduate school himself. So you should do that in undergraduate school as well. Ask questions when you don't know something. It's very important. But particularly as you get to know more things, there's this impression that you want to make that you are as smart as anybody else. But truly being smart means that you know how little you do know about any given topic. Later in the chapter, he discusses an important relationship that develops in Wyoming, and that is with his soon-to-be wife, Robin. His relationship starts there and almost ends there as he gains a fellowship after getting his master's degree in the first 2 years at Wyoming. That fellowship is a work opportunity after getting an advanced graduate degree that often comes along with a stipend or pay and gives you an opportunity to do research in the area that you've been studying in the field, if you will, in a research laboratory. So the NIH, the National Institute of Health, way back in North Carolina, again, gives him an opportunity after he wins a scholarship that his new mentor, Charlie Kassir, who was the mentor of his undergraduate professor, Rob Haken, gives him, actually kind of pushes him to go get, even though they only choose one minority candidate in the whole United States every year, he did win that scholarship. And unfortunately, it causes the breakup of he and Robin. But in the next chapter, you'll see that is not a permanent breakup. So, spoiler alert. Okay, that's, I think, about it for High Price. assignments. This week, you should be getting a rough draft done of your paper if you're in SOCI 370. If you're in 270, make sure you keep up with the bi-weekly journal, the weekly quiz, your online media homework, and the discussion for the week. Okay, thanks. See you next time. Bye.